I remember that day vividly. I sat frozen, staring at the faces gathered around the festive table. Some were eating, some were laughing. Only I knew one of these people would not live to see the morning. Snow fell endlessly outside the window, each flake dissolving into the silence of the night. That white stillness stood in sharp contrast to the warmth and cheer inside. As glasses clinked and laughter rose around me, I pressed a hand against my chest, realizing that my premonition was no lie. This holiday was not meant to unite us, but to tear us apart forever. And before I take you deeper into that night, I want you to stay with me until the very end. Subscribe, share your thoughts in the comments, because this story is not just mine. In families everywhere, secrets like these are waiting at the table, hidden behind smiles. The turkey sat untouched in front of me, its golden skin glistening in the light, steam rising like a ghost between the dishes. Around me, my family celebrated, blind to the truth that hovered above us like smoke. They believed it was Thanksgiving, but for me it felt like a sentence, a verdict already sealed. The chandelier above flickered, shadows stretching long across the walls. My uncle's booming laugh echoed through the room as he poured himself another drink, sloshing whiskey onto the pristine white tablecloth. My cousin whispered something to his sister, both of them giggling, their eyes darting toward the head of the table where my father sat, motionless. He hadn't touched his food. His knife and fork lay neatly beside his plate, untouched, as though he were waiting for something. For us, for the right moment. Beside him, an envelope rested on the table. Plain, white, innocent. But the way my father's hand hovered near it told me everything I needed to know. It was no ordinary letter. It was a storm waiting to be unleashed. The laughter dulled. A heavy quiet began to creep across the room. One by one, forks slowed, glasses lingered in midair, conversations faltered. Every eye, sooner or later, fell on that envelope. And I knew whatever was inside it would change us all, forever. My father finally cleared his throat, the sound low and rough, like gravel scraping against stone. The room fell into silence instantly. Even the youngest children seemed to sense that something greater than them was about to unfold. He tapped the envelope lightly with his index finger, almost playfully, but there was no humor in his eyes. His gaze swept across the table, lingering on each of us for a moment too long, as if he were weighing our souls one by one. "You all think this dinner is about tradition," he began, his voice steady but sharp enough to cut through the tension. "Food, laughter, gratitude. But tonight there is something more important, something overdue." The envelope sat in the center of his palm now, no longer hidden at his side. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line, her hand tightening around the stem of her wineglass. She knew, or at least she suspected. "What is that, Dad?" my brother asked, his voice light, trying to mask the unease in the room. "Some kind of holiday speech?" Father's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Not quite." He tore the envelope open with a deliberate slowness, every movement exaggerated as though he enjoyed watching us squirm. From inside, he pulled out a stack of papers, thin, yellowed slightly at the edges, legal-looking. My heart lurched. "Tonight," he said, laying the pages flat on the tablecloth, "we talk about the future. My future and yours. This family has been built on silence, on secrets, on pretending everything is fine. But silence doesn't last forever." No one moved. The only sound was the faint crackle of the fireplace, the occasional hiss of a log collapsing in the flames. "Dad," my sister finally whispered, "what is it?" He didn't answer her directly. Instead, he unfolded the first page, scanning it quickly before looking up again. His eyes locked onto me, and for a brief second I thought I saw something almost apologetic in them. "This," he said, "is my will." Gasps rippled around the table. Forks clattered against plates. My cousin muttered something under his breath, but I barely heard it over the ringing in my ears. A will? Here? On Thanksgiving night? My father's voice cut through the chaos, calm and unwavering. "I have decided it is time. I am not a man who trusts chance. My legacy, my fortune, my name, they will not be left for the world to decide. They will be decided tonight. By me. In front of all of you." My uncle leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "This isn't the time, Robert," he hissed. "You'll ruin the holiday." But father only shook his head slowly. "No, this holiday was ruined long before tonight. I'm simply pulling back the curtain." The room trembled with unspoken words. Betrayal, fear, greed. Everyone understood, though no one dared to say it. The battle for inheritance had just begun. I stared at the papers, my pulse quickening. My father's will lay there, its contents still hidden, its power immense. And yet, as he held it like a weapon, I realized something horrifying. Someone here was willing to kill for it. Father adjusted his glasses, the crackle of the fire punctuating the silence. He spread the first page flat with both hands, his fingers steady, deliberate. "You all deserve to know," he said, "not just what you'll inherit, but why." His eyes swept the table, pausing on each of us like a judge measuring guilt. "Because inheritance is not just about money. It is about loyalty, about truth, about what kind of person you chose to be when you thought no one was watching." My stomach twisted. This wasn't going to be a simple reading of numbers and names. This was a reckoning. Father cleared his throat and began to read. Clause 1. To my daughter, Elaine. Elaine sat straighter, her hand trembling against her wineglass. Her eyes darted toward her husband, who gave her a tight, nervous smile. "I leave the lakeside cabin in Vermont. But before you celebrate," Father continued, his tone dropping lower, "you should know I'm aware of what you did there last July. The cabin cameras caught more than sunsets." The words struck like thunder. Elaine's face drained of color. "What are you talking about?" she whispered. Father didn't flinch. "You thought your weekend escape was private. You thought bringing another man there would go unnoticed. But the world is not blind, Elaine, and neither am I." Gasps erupted around the table. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Elaine's husband froze, his jaw tightening as he tried to process the meaning. "That's a lie," Elaine snapped, her voice breaking. "You planted this. You—" Father lifted his hand calmly. "Deny it if you wish. But I've seen the footage, and now so has your husband." Her husband pushed back from the table violently, his chair scraping against the floor. "Is it true?" he hissed, his face twisted with rage. Elaine's lips trembled, but no words came out. Her silence was louder than any confession. The room shifted. Laughter, warmth, the clinking of glasses, gone. In their place, suspicion, shame, anger. Thanksgiving had become a courtroom. Father turned the page. His voice was like iron. "Clause 2—" But he didn't finish. At that moment Elaine stood up, her chair toppling behind her. Tears streamed down her face as she shouted, "You're destroying us!" "No," Father said coldly. "You destroyed yourself." "I'm only giving truth a place at the table." The weight of his words settled over us like the snow outside, and as I looked at the pages still left unread, a terrible realization gripped me. If the first clause revealed adultery, what secrets were hidden in the rest? Elaine stormed out, the front door slamming so hard the window panes rattled. The cold draught crept into the room, chilling the air despite the fire's glow. Nobody moved for a long moment. Forks lay untouched, glasses half raised. Father didn't flinch. He simply adjusted his papers again, as though her departure was nothing more than a page turned. "Clause 2, he said evenly. His eyes shifted toward my older brother, Richard. Richard shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He had always been the confident one. Sharp suit, expensive watch, the air of a man who had everything under control. But that night, a thin sheen of sweat gathered at his temple. "To my son, Richard," Father read, "I leave the company shares. But with them, I also leave the truth you've tried so hard to bury." Richard stiffened. "What truth?" His voice cracked slightly, betraying the calm mask he wore. Father's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "The loans, Richard. The gambling. The men you borrowed from who now circle you like vultures." The table gasped again, a chorus of disbelief. Mother clutched at her necklace as though it might hold her upright. "That's not true," Richard snapped. His eyes darted left and right, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. "I've made investments," Father cut him off. "Investments? Don't insult us. You drained over $500,000 in less than a year. You forged documents. You used family assets as collateral." Richard's face flushed deep red. He opened his mouth, but no words came. His silence was damning. I remembered then the mysterious phone calls late at night, Richard's constant trips to business meetings in Atlantic City. I had told myself not to wonder too much. Now I wished I had. "You thought you could outsmart everyone," Father continued, his voice hard as stone. "But debts always come due, and soon men will come knocking at your door. Men who don't ask twice." Richard slammed his fist on the table. The silverware jumped. "You don't know what you're talking about." Father's eyes narrowed. "Sit down, Richard. You may inherit shares, but you'll also inherit your shame. The company will not save you from yourself." Richard sank back into his chair, his breath ragged, his eyes burning holes into the floor. For once, the man who had always looked untouchable seemed smaller than the boy he once was. A heavy silence pressed on all of us. My siblings avoided each other's eyes, afraid of what the next page might reveal about them. And as I watched Father turn to the third clause, a terrifying thought struck me. If Elaine was guilty of betrayal and Richard of ruin, what secret was hidden about me? Father's fingers turned another crisp page, the sound slicing through the silence sharper than any knife. I sat frozen, my palms damp against my thighs. I could already feel the weight of my own name coming, as though it were carved into the room itself. And then he read it. "To my youngest child," he said, his eyes lifting to meet mine, "I leave the cabin in Vermont." But not without a warning. The room shifted. I felt every pair of eyes dig into me, heavy, accusing. The cabin, our childhood refuge, a place filled with laughter and campfire smoke, suddenly felt poisoned by the way he said it. A warning? Father leaned forward, his voice low, deliberate. "You've hidden something, haven't you? A truth you prayed would never surface. But secrets, my son, are like embers. No matter how deeply buried, they find a way to burn through." My mouth went dry. "I don't know what you mean," I managed, though even to my own ears the words sounded frail, rehearsed. He studied me for a long moment, his gaze a scalpel peeling back layers. "Do you remember the night in Vermont?" he asked softly. The room seemed to close in around me. My siblings leaned forward, scenting blood. Elaine had returned quietly from the porch, arms folded, her eyes sharp with vindication. delighted perhaps that my turn had come. Richard sneered, desperate to deflect attention from his own shame. I tried to breathe, but the memory pressed against my chest like a coffin lid. The night in Vermont, the fire, the screams, the secret I had buried under silence for years. "No," I whispered, "that's not—" But father cut me off with a single word. "Liar." The turkey sat untouched in the center of the table, its skin now dull under the dying candles. My father's words echoed louder than any thunder. "You think I don't know? I know everything. What you did, what it cost us. And now everyone else will know too." I looked around the table, faces twisted with confusion, curiosity, fear. Some of them would never forgive me once the truth spilled. And in that moment I realized my father wasn't reading a will. He was conducting an execution, one name at a time. The name Vermont rang in my ears like a church bell at midnight, a reminder of something I had buried so deeply that I prayed time itself would smother it. But time doesn't smother. It sharpens. It waits. The room was silent, every eye fixed on me. The fire crackled. Outside, snow kept falling, as if the world wanted to bury the truth the same way I had. Father's voice was steady, merciless. "3 summers ago, the cabin. Do you deny being there that night?" I swallowed hard. My tongue felt like ash. "No, I was there." A murmur rolled around the table. Elaine's face twisted in mock sympathy. Richard leaned forward with hungry curiosity, and Mother's lips pressed into a thin, terrified line. Father adjusted his glasses, eyes like knives. "And do you deny what happened after the fire started?" My chest clenched. The image came back unbidden. Flames licking the night sky, smoke choking the air, someone's scream slicing through the darkness. The way my hands had shaken, the weight of what I had chosen to do, or not to do. I shut my eyes, but that only made the memory sharper. "I tried to stop it," I whispered. My voice cracked. But it was too late. Gasps erupted. My nephew at the far end of the table dropped his fork. It clattered against the plate, loud as a gunshot. Father leaned back, folding his arms. "Too late? For whom?" The question sliced through me. I wanted to answer, but the words stuck in my throat. Elaine slammed her hand on the table. "For whom, damn it? What happened in Vermont?" The heat of the fire in my memory pressed against my skin. The truth clawed at me, desperate to escape, but my mind screamed, "Not yet," because telling them everything now would shatter the family completely, and I wasn't ready to be the one who lit that fuse. Father seemed to sense my hesitation. He closed the will with a sharp thud, then tapped the cover. "You don't need to speak," he said coldly. "Your silence already says enough, and when I read the next clause, they'll know exactly what you tried to bury." The room grew heavier. Even the snow outside seemed to pause, waiting, and in that moment, one horrifying thought took root in my mind. If he revealed everything about Vermont, I might not leave this table alive. Father reached beneath the stack of papers and pulled out a thin, weathered envelope. The paper was yellowed at the edges, its flap sealed with wax. He held it up between 2 fingers like a priest raising the sacrament. "This," he said, "contains the truth about Vermont." My heart nearly stopped. That envelope, I had prayed it didn't exist. I had convinced myself the night had died in silence, that no trace remained but the shadows in my memory. Richard leaned forward eagerly, his lips curled in a cruel smile. "Open it," he urged. "Let's all hear what the saintly youngest did." Elaine smirked through her tear-stained cheeks. Betrayal loved company. Father broke the seal slowly, deliberately, the rip of paper loud enough to make us all flinch. He slid out a small stack of photographs, their glossy surfaces catching the candlelight. He placed the first one on the table. It was the cabin, its porch lit by flames, windows glowing like the eyes of a beast. The fire was unmistakable, that night frozen forever in ink. My breath caught. He laid down another photo. This time it was me. My silhouette standing at the edge of the trees, half hidden, my face ghostly in the glow of fire, my hands empty, watching, not helping. The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, the scrape of chairs. My mother whispered my name, trembling, as if she were seeing me for the first time. Father didn't stop. He placed the third photo. It showed a shadow collapsing in the doorway of the cabin, someone inside. A figure barely visible through the smoke, a person who had not made it out. The photo blurred in my vision as blood roared in my ears. That night, that scream, the body in the doorway. Elaine slammed her palm against the table. "You let someone die?" Her voice cracked into a shriek. "You stood there and watched?" I wanted to shout back, to defend myself, to tell them what really happened, but the words froze in my throat, because the truth was even worse than what the photographs suggested. Father set the photos aside and unfolded a single sheet of paper. "This," he said, "is a signed statement from someone who was there, someone who saw everything." My blood ran cold. A witness. Richard laughed bitterly. "So our perfect little brother isn't so perfect after all. Father, please, read it." But Father didn't. He slid the statement back into the envelope and tapped it with one finger. His eyes locked on mine. "Not yet," he said. "The rest of them don't deserve the full truth, not until you decide to speak it yourself." The envelope sat in the middle of the table, heavy as a loaded gun. Everyone stared at it, but I could feel their eyes drifting back to me, burning holes in my skin. Thanksgiving dinner had become a trial, and the jury was my family. But worse than their judgment was the truth clawing inside me, because the one who died in Vermont wasn't just a stranger. It was someone they all knew. The envelope lay between us like a sleeping serpent, but it was the photographs that gnawed at everyone's mind. Elaine couldn't sit still, her nails scraped against the wooden table. Richard poured himself another drink with shaking hands. Even the children had fallen silent, their laughter long gone, replaced by the quiet weight of fear they didn't understand. Father didn't rush. He knew suspense was a blade that cut deeper when wielded slowly. Finally, he leaned forward and placed his hand flat on the photographs. "You want to know who was inside?" he said. His voice was calm, but each syllable fell heavy, deliberate. The fire crackled. A log collapsed into sparks. The snow outside pressed harder against the glass, as if even the storm wanted to listen. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a trespasser. It was family. My breath caught in my throat. My heart pounded so hard I thought my chest would split open. Mother clutched at her necklace, her eyes wide. "Who?" she whispered. Father's gaze flicked toward me, pinning me in place. "It was your uncle." My brother. The table gasped as one. Forks clattered. Elaine's hand flew to her mouth. Richard cursed under his breath. "Uncle Henry, the man who used to sit at this very table, telling stories of his war days, filling the room with laughter. The man who had taught me how to fish in the Vermont lake, whose pipe smoke still clung to my childhood memories. And I had watched him die." The room blurred as every pair of eyes turned to me. Rage, shock, betrayal. "You let him burn?" Elaine's voice was venom. "You could have saved him." "I tried." My voice cracked, raw with desperation. "I swear to God I tried, but the fire—" "Enough!" Richard slammed his fist on the table, rattling glasses. "You're a coward!" You stood there and watched. Don't you dare call that trying mother's sobs filled the silence that followed. She covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking, as if she couldn't bear to look at me. Father didn't comfort her. He simply leaned back, his expression cold as stone. "I told you," he said, "inheritance is not about money. It is about truth. And the truth is, one of my children watched my brother die." His words cut deeper than the flames ever had. But what they didn't know, what I had never spoken aloud, was that Uncle Henry's death hadn't been an accident. The fire that night, it hadn't started on its own, and I wasn't the only one standing in those woods. My pulse roared in my ears. They thought the worst of me. A coward, a man who had let his uncle burn while I stood frozen. But the truth was darker, sharper, a truth that even I had buried so deep, hoping never to exhume it. That night, the night of the fire, I wasn't alone. The woods had been silent except for the crackle of flames devouring timber. Smoke twisted through the air, searing my throat. I remember sprinting toward the cabin, hearing Henry's voice calling, muffled by fire and fear. And then I saw him, a figure standing just beyond the tree line, half hidden in the shadows, not running for help, not lifting a hand, just watching. The firelight caught his face for only a second, but that was enough. The glint of his eyes, the curl of his mouth. I knew him. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't some drifter wandering the woods. It was Richard, my brother. I froze, staring at him. He didn't move, didn't shout. He only raised a single finger to his lips, telling me to stay silent, to let Henry burn. The memory slammed back into me with brutal force as Richard sat across the table now, pouring himself another drink, pretending to be furious at me, pretending to mourn. I clenched my fists under the table, nails digging into my palms, so hard I felt blood bead. He thought he had erased that moment. He thought the fire swallowed his secret whole. But I had seen. And as Father's eyes burned into me, demanding answers, I realized something chilling. Richard wasn't just hiding his guilt. He was waiting for me to carry it. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Richard sneered, though I caught the flicker of panic in his eyes. "Say something, damn it. Defend yourself." I almost did. I almost screamed the truth across the table. That the blood wasn't mine to carry, that Richard had been there, silent and cruel, as the fire consumed Henry. But I swallowed it back. Not yet. The room buzzed with suspicion, accusations flying like arrows. But I stayed silent, clutching my secret like a dagger. Because if I spoke too soon, it would vanish in the noise. Number. I would wait. I would watch. And when the time came, I would strike the truth into the heart of this family so deep it could never be pulled out. Richard thought he had buried Henry that night, but it wasn't Henry's ghost haunting this table. It was his. I pushed my plate away without tasting another bite. The room hummed with the nervous energy of people waiting for a verdict, but no one had yet accused aloud what I'd been carrying. I could feel Richard's eyes on me, sharp and predatory, as if he were daring me to expose him. For a moment I considered silence again, the easier path, the one that would keep the rest of my life comfortably small and contained. Then my father folded his hands and said simply, "Speak." It wasn't a prompt. It was a command, a call for truth. The envelope had become a mandate. All masks were supposed to fall off tonight. My voice came out raw, steady as I could make it. "There was someone in the trees that night," I said. Heads turned, breath caught. "It wasn't a stranger." A small, ugly laugh escaped Richard, a sound meant to discredit. "What are you on about?" Ghost stories now? No. I looked at each of them. Their faces blurred into one panorama of shock and waiting. It was you, Richard. You stood there. You watched Uncle Henry burn. The table erupted like a pot pushed to a boil. Forks rattled. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Elaine pushed back from the table so hard the chair legs scraped the floor. Richard's face went from flushed to white to something like migraine pain. "Lies," he spat. "You're lying for pity." You always wanted to be the martyr of the family. I had rehearsed the confession inside my head 100 times, but nothing had prepared me for the tidal wave of reactions. My brother rose, shoved his chair back, and the room felt small and wet with accusation. "You saw me?" he demanded. "You watched me and did nothing? You were there," I said, and the words felt like stones dropping into a well. "You raised a finger to your lips. You told me not to scream. You told me to let him die." Richard took a stumbling step toward me, rage like a live thing. "You have no proof," he growled. "You've got nothing but your word." His hand curled into a fist. The whole length of his arm quivered. I reached into my jacket and felt the coolness of the photograph in my pocket, the one I'd taken with my phone the week before when I'd driven to the old clearing to stare at the charred stones. I hadn't told them I had it. I hadn't told them I'd been back. "You think I'm insane," I said. "Go look at the trail's camera footage by the lake. You left footprints. So did I. The ranger's log has your truck registered that night at 2 a.m., and I have witnesses." "Witnesses?" Richard balked, incredulous. He glanced at the others, hunting for allies. "Who?" "Your fantasies?" My cousin swallowed. My aunt looked away. For a suspended moment it seemed like the family might fracture into factions, those who would side with the social success story, and those who would believe the man who had, until tonight, been quiet and invisible at the edges. Then my father, who, until now, had presided with placid severity, leaned forward with a glint in his eye I had never seen in him. "We will not devolve into name-calling," he said. "If there are records, then we will see them. If there are witnesses, they can speak. But I will not have my family tear itself apart on rumor alone." The sentence should have quieted the room. Instead, it focused every eye on me. I felt suddenly very small and very huge at once, the source and the vessel for an accusation I could no longer contain. "All right," I said. "We'll prove it." My throat burned, but I pushed on. "I went back. I found tire marks and footprints. The ranger remembers a truck idling on the access road. He remembers a man arguing on his phone about setting things right and making sure nothing is left. He remembers a name." I watched Richard's composure crack. The way his jaw worked told me the truth was gnawing at him. He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried a different tack. Minimization, charm, plea. "You don't have to do this, Lee," he said, voice suddenly softer, practiced. "We can manage it. We keep it private, like adults. We pay the debts. We smooth things over. No one needs to know. Don't drag Mom into this." That line hit my mother like a physical blow. She blinked hard, hurt painting her features. My father's face, however, turned to flint. "Manage it?" he echoed. "So we keep a corpse in the closet and pretend our hands are clean?" "Number. There are laws for what was done. You want to keep buying silence with money? You'll find I'm not the father who covers up crimes." At his words, Richard's bravado snapped. He lurched back, palms on the table, breathing hard. "This is blackmail," he said. "You're trying to ruin me." "It's not blackmail," I said. "It's responsibility." "You stood and let a man die. You chose not to act. I chose differently. I could feel my hands trembling. I didn't save him. I watched. I failed absolute silence. Not the anticipatory kind, but the dead version, like the hush that settles before an avalanche. My mother sobbed openly now, an unbearable small sound. The kids were being led to another room by my sister, their innocence shielded from the grown-up ruin of the evening. Then, in the strange way families do when some old fault is being cleaned and it hurts, accusations bounced around the table. Friends I hadn't seen in years poised like jurors, all with opinions, all with suggestions. My cousin insisted the sheriff should be called. My aunt pleaded for prayer, then later for discretion. My brother, Richard, began to mutter about lawyers and defamation. "It's not over," he kept saying, as if repetition could make the past shapeless again. It was over for me. I had spilled the truth and no longer had the option of retreat. Several hours later, after phones had been checked and calls made, a knock sounded at the door. The sheriff, local, grave, stood just inside, snow on his shoulders. He was thin, used to small towns' rot and the way secrets leak. "You called?" he asked, glancing at the table where the envelope lay like a verdict. "Yes," Father said quietly. "There are questions we want answered." Outside the window, the snow continued to fall, soft and indifferent. Inside, our house had become a courthouse, a confession booth, and a battlefield. The night that had once been ordinary, Thanksgiving had calcified into something else, an unpeeling of lies that would not stop until every unspoken thing was forced into the light. When the sheriff took statements, when flash photographs were dusted through, the family tore open in ways that no one had planned. Lawyers whispered in corners. Text messages exploded. People chose sides, the ones wanting to preserve the old story, and those who, like me, were finally trying to make truth matter more than convenience. By the time dawn hinted at pale light, we had a file, a case, names attached, and a feeling settled in the hollow of my stomach. Relief, yes, but also the terrible clarity that what I had revealed was not the end. It was only the beginning. The living room had become a courtroom without walls. Shadows from the fire danced on everyone's faces, making them look older, harsher, as if judgment had already been passed. Richard stood near the fireplace, jaw tight, arms crossed. His arrogance had cracked, but it hadn't shattered. "So what?" he said finally, his voice trembling but still trying to project control. "Yes, I met with a lawyer. Yes, I drafted documents. But it was business. Father wanted me to handle things." "No," my father said firmly, his hand pressed flat against the table as if anchoring himself to the moment. "What I wanted was honesty. What I got was betrayal." A hush fell. Even the children upstairs seemed to sense it. Their laughter had gone silent. My Aunt Margaret leaned forward, her voice sharp. "Richard, you've been circling his money like a vulture for years. Every loan, every investment, always under the guise of helping the family. But this is theft." Richard's lips curled into something between a sneer and a plea. "You think you're saints? Every one of you is taken from him. College tuition, medical bills, vacations paid for. Don't act like I'm the villain because I was smart enough to put things in writing." My father's eyes burned with a quiet rage. "Smartness is not the same as decency." He slid the envelope closer across the table. "Inside here, I've placed my final decision. Tonight, you'll all learn the truth about who inherits what." Everyone leaned forward. Breath slowed. Even the crackle of the fire seemed to pause. Richard's face drained of color. "You mean I mean," my father interrupted, "that I already changed everything, months ago." When I first suspected you, the room erupted in whispers, gasps, half-formed questions. My mother covered her mouth with her hand, Margaret muttered a prayer under her breath, and Samuel, the quietest of my brothers, finally spoke. "Dad, who gets what then?" My father didn't answer right away. He let the silence hang, a noose tightening around Richard's throat. Finally, he said, "Not Richard." Not a single penny. Richard staggered back a step as if struck. "You can't." "I can." And I did. The words landed like a gavel. But then, just when I thought the night had reached its breaking point, another voice cut through the room. Calm, icy, unexpected. It was my cousin, Elaine, who had been silent the entire evening, sipping her wine like an observer at a play. She placed her glass down carefully and said, "Actually, none of you are going to like what I have to say." Because Father wasn't the only one making secret arrangements, every head turned. "2 months ago," she continued, her tone dripping with quiet satisfaction, "I found something. Papers. In Mother's sewing box. A completely different will. Signed. Notarized. One that changes everything again." Gasps filled the air. My father's face went pale. Richard's eyes lit up with sudden, desperate hope. The fire popped in the hearth, scattering sparks like tiny explosions. "Elaine," my father whispered, "what are you talking about?" She smiled, a smile I'll never forget, cold, triumphant. "I'm talking about a secret you never meant us to know. About a will that doesn't leave this family divided in two, but in ruins." And just like that, the night wasn't about Richard anymore. It was about Elaine. The silence after Elaine's words was heavier than the storm pressing against the windows. No one moved. No one breathed. My father's hand trembled as he reached for his glass of water, but never lifted it. His eyes locked on Elaine's with disbelief, as if his own blood had just turned into a stranger. "What will?" he demanded, voice hoarse, voice. Elaine leaned back in her chair, perfectly composed, almost savoring the tension. "The one Mother hid. I don't know why she kept it secret, but she did, and I found it, folded between scraps of fabric, tucked away like some shameful relic." Richard's eyes gleamed, desperate for a lifeline. "And what does it say?" Elaine's lips curved into a slow smile. "That everything goes to me." The room erupted. Margaret slammed her hand on the table, shouting, "Lies!" My mother shook her head furiously, whispering, "No, no, that can't be true." Samuel stood up so abruptly his chair toppled, but Elaine remained calm, her voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. "Not lies. The document is notarized, dated, and signed by both parents. Every asset, every piece of land, every account, left in my name." My father's face went pale. "That's impossible. I never—" He stopped, faltering, his brow furrowed as though memory clawed at him. And then it hit him. His shoulders slumped. His eyes closed briefly, like a man struck by the weight of his own forgotten sins. "Your mother," he said quietly. "Years ago, she begged me to draft a separate will. She said it was only a precaution. I agreed, but I swore it would never be used." Elaine's voice hardened. "And yet here we are." The fire crackled. The smell of roasted turkey and spices now seemed rancid, twisted by the bitterness in the air. Richard, suddenly emboldened, let out a wild laugh. "Do you hear that? Not me, not you, not any of us. It's Elaine. Father, your golden little secret is out." But Margaret's eyes narrowed. "No, this isn't over. Elaine, if you had that will, why didn't you bring it forward earlier? Why tonight?" Elaine didn't flinch. "Because tonight is when it matters. Tonight is when truth burns brightest. And tonight, she glanced around the table, her gaze sharp as glass, is when you all finally see that I'm not the quiet little cousin in the corner. I'm the one holding the knife at this family's throat. Her words sent a chill through me. For the first time, I realized Elaine wasn't just revealing a will. She was declaring war, and something in her eyes told me she wasn't finished. The night had long surrendered to darkness, but inside that dining room, time itself felt trapped, suspended between rage, fear, and betrayal. The storm outside beat against the windows like a living thing, desperate to drown out what was unfolding inside. Elaine stood at the head of the table now, no longer a guest, but a commander. Her voice carried the weight of inevitability. You've all lived your lives thinking love binds a family. But you know what binds us tighter than love? She held up the folded parchment, the will, with trembling triumph. Power. And I have it, Richard snarled, his once suave charm stripped away. You think you can wave that paper around and I'll just vanish? Number. If this family burns, I'll make sure you burn with it. He slammed his hand down so hard that glasses toppled, red wine bleeding into the tablecloth like fresh blood. Margaret rose to her feet, her face white with fury. Stop this madness! Can't you see what's happening? We're tearing each other apart over scraps, while Father sits there. She gestured at him with shaking hands. Watching us like we're animals fighting for the carcass. For the first time, my father spoke with a voice that silenced us all. Enough. The fire behind him painted his face in flickering light, half shadow, half flame. I created this mess. I indulged lies. I hid truths. I let greed rot my bloodline. But this ends tonight. Elaine, give me that will. Elaine hesitated. Her fingers clutched the document tighter. If I give this up, I'm nothing again. Invisible. Forgotten. Her voice cracked, and for a flicker of a moment the cold mask slipped to reveal a wounded child beneath. Then the thunder boomed, shaking the house, and in that instant Richard lunged. His hand grabbed for the will, but Elaine twisted away. The parchment tore with a scream of paper. Half of it fell into the fire, curling instantly into ash. The room gasped as smoke curled upward. My father staggered forward, eyes locked on the burning corner. Do you realize what you've done? But Richard only sneered. Now none of us get it. No proof, no claim, nothing but chaos. Elaine stared at the half-document clutched in her hand. Her breathing was sharp, uneven. No, she whispered, shaking her head. It's not over. Not yet. The storm howled outside, and I knew, whatever end awaited us, it would come before dawn. The fire devoured the last corner of the will, and with it, the last fragile thread that held us together. The room stank of smoke, wine, and sweat. My father's eyes, once filled with fire, dimmed with a kind of weary surrender. No wealth, he whispered, no inheritance. Nothing but the truth left. Elaine clutched the torn half of the will as if it were still whole, but even she knew it was useless now. Her triumph had turned to ash along with the paper. She looked smaller, her shoulders sagging, her bravado stripped away. Richard stood in the ruins of his own arrogance, sweat glistening on his brow. Without the will, without proof, he was no heir, no schemer, just another broken man exposed for his lies. He tried to speak, but no one listened any more. Margaret's fury gave way to silence. She lowered herself back into her chair and stared at her plate, as though the untouched turkey might still pretend this was a holiday dinner, not a battlefield. And me? I saw it clearly now. The wealth was never what destroyed us. It was the secrets, years of them, rotting just beneath the surface, waiting for one storm to bring them to light. The storm outside raged louder, battering the house like judgment itself. One by one, we drifted apart. Richard stormed into the night, swallowed by snow. Elaine collapsed into sobs, the will's ashes clinging to her trembling fingers. My father slumped in his chair, the weight of a lifetime's mistakes pressing down on his chest. By dawn, the family was gone. Not dead, but ruined. Trust shattered, love hollowed out. We had come together for Thanksgiving, but left with nothing but emptiness. And the truth? The truth was merciless. We had never been united by love or blood, only by lies. And when those lies burned, so did we. The storm eased as the sun rose, but the silence it left behind was colder than the snow itself, than the snow